Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. It's Friday and it's a really, really good Friday. We have got a great program for you. As a matter of fact, I don't want this week to end, Marie. You did a great job this week getting a lot of wonderful guests. And in the second hour today, I'm going to tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about your death. And it's amazing how talking about your death can really bring life to your life. It can really refocus the mind and the spirit. And so we'll talk a bit about Memento Mori, the second hour. This hour, well, we're going to talk about what is probably, what may well be the most urgent, most grave moral consideration of our time as we continue. I'm one of those slippery slope people. I believe in slippery slopes. And I know people get made fun of for believing in slippery slopes, but it seems to me we are on our foot is firmly planted in unfirm places where we are in danger of slipping down into greater and greater depravities. And eugenics is one of those areas where the increasing embrace of a kind of what I might call a eugenic mentality is a terrible, horrible danger for our culture, for our future, for our children, for other people's children. If you'd like to talk about eugenics, we're going to talk a bit about eugenics and its relationship with contraception this hour. 888-318-7884 is the number. 888-318-7884. We invite you to get in on the conversation. And you are always welcome, whether you're Catholic or not, whether you're Christian or not. You may, in fact, be a person who is more comfortable than we are with the idea of eugenics. We'd love to talk with you as well. 888-318-7884. To help us do that, Dr. Angela Franks, a theologian, speaker, writer, mother of six. She serves as professor of theology at St. John's Seminary in Boston, the author of several books, including a couple of books, one on eugenics and one on contraception. Margaret Sanger's Eugenic Legacy, one of the books I imagine we will refer to. Dr. Angela Franks, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Am I wrong about the gravity of the growing embrace of a eugenics mentality?
No, I'm also a slippery slope person, I think. And so we see it in the history that I lay out in my book on Sanger, that that you get used to worse things as, you know, you get used to bad things. Like it just kind of prepares you for worse things. And so I think we are still stuck in a eugenic mindset, and that's a real problem.
Adolf Hitler cured a lot of people of the eugenic mindset for a while, it seems, because people went, oh, if we go down that road, that is not a road we want to go down to. Is that correct?
Yeah, eugenics was a really respectable way of thinking in the academy and government, you know, pretty much in any elite circles. It was very respectable. It was really expected to be a eugenicist in the 20s and the 30s and even in through the early and mid 40s. But once people learned the full extent of what Hitler was doing, you know, you see it in the documents that I would read in the archives, where the eugenics organizations would be scrambling now to redefine themselves, rename themselves, and so forth. And so it certainly did take a dive after Hitler, and unfortunately after his defeat. But really it repackaged itself. And what's also in the archives is that the savvier people realized that eugenics could repackage itself, first of all, globally as population control, which it was, in fact, already doing, but then domestically through things like selective abortions after prenatal testing, and through, in general, contraception and abortion.
888-318-7884 is our number. Dr. Angela Franks is here to speak with us about eugenics and contraception. So maybe give us the basic description of what eugenics is for those who don't know, or maybe have only seen it repackaged as population control. What is eugenics?
Eugenics, the word means good genes, good genome. And so the idea behind eugenics is that you can eliminate problems by eliminating people with genes that predispose them to problems. And so originally this was seen as, well, we'll do this through things like contraception and sterilization. It took a few decades before people would accept abortion as one of those means. But now, and then, of course, with Hitler, and now also things like euthanasia. And so getting both the old and the young. The idea being that the mindset still that we have is that we can solve problems like poverty, like disease and disability, crime. We can solve these problems by eliminating the people with genetic or environmental predispositions to have the problems.
I think it is fair to say as well that as you said, the early part of the 20th century, as eugenics was thought very respectable, prominent Catholic leaders were always opposed to eugenics. It has always been. I'm thinking of the Bishop of Munster in Germany, who stood up against Hitler's eugenics plans, but popes and professors and priests and women religious stood up against this eugenic mentality.
That was always understood very clearly by people who are in favor of eugenics, that the Catholic Church was the enemy, and they had to negotiate around the Catholic Church somehow. And so sometimes that meant infiltrating in a sense. And so the Rockefeller Foundation on population control, contraception, and eugenics would do things like sponsor conferences at Notre Dame, or try to fund theologians who might get the church to reconsider things. So there are different ways people, tried to deal with this Catholic problem. But you see it in the encyclical Casti Connubii in the early 30s, and just in general that the Catholic leadership was clear on eugenics and also on the connection between eugenics and contraception. When the Anglicans were debating contraception, and when they finally, in I think it's 1932 at the Lambeth conference, when they approved of contraceptive use in limited cases and so forth, a lot of the debate centered around the eugenic value of contraception, and that, we can't, as modern Anglicans, we can't close our eyes to the fact that science says that this is how we need to address these social issues. And so while other denominations are starting to fold, the Catholic Church didn't, and that was always recognized as a problem by the eugenicists.
Again, our number is 888-318-7884. We welcome your call. Whichever side you might come down on this issue, we try to have civil conversations. 888-318-7884. So what is the connection between contraception and eugenics? Why do we make that? Because actually, we're very comfortable with contraception in the world today. It's almost thought that you are a troglodyte or something if you don't accept the contraceptive idea. What's the connection between these two thoughts?
So there's a historical connection and there's a conceptual connection, right? There's like the link that you can make in your mind. So the historical connection is that, in fact, almost all of the major promoters of contraception included eugenics as at least a partial and sometimes even an almost total reason for having contraception legalized and having it made available. So there's this historical connection. Well, so why would they do that? What's the conceptual connection between the two? And so with somebody like Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood in 1916, excuse me. So for Sanger, it was this idea of control. It's what I call an ideology or mentality of control, that in order to have eugenic control, so to keep the so-called unfit from reproducing, in order to have population control, so to not have too many of the wrong kinds of people, you needed birth control. And so Sanger actually promoted the term birth control, which wasn't the most common term being used for contraception. She promoted it precisely because she saw so clearly that it was the way to get the kind of control over the population that she wanted.
Dr. Angela Franks is our guest. Our number 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. You're welcome to call with your questions. I have to take a quick break, and then we will come back to take calls for Dr. Angela Franks. 888-318-7884. Before we go, and I'm pretty sure this is illegal, what they're asking me to do, Nick, we have a friends and family plan. I know that someone has copyrighted that. We can't possibly be in the clear using that. But we have the Friends and Family Plan at shop.catholic.com. What that means is they give you 50% off your order when you buy a 5-pack of items for friends and family. There's a whole bunch of things that you can buy to throw in that Friends and Family Pack. Shop.catholic.com, 50% off right now on the Friends and Family Pack.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Now, not only can you watch EWTN anywhere but anytime with EWTN On Demand. Get on-demand access to more than 12,000 EWTN programs, including live shows and specials, all in one place, all free. Just go to EWTN.com/on-demand. There's nothing to fill out, no memberships required, and no fees to pay. All you need is an internet connection, and you're good to go. EWTN On Demand. Fast, easy, and free.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, on this day that we celebrate the anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision. Among, you'd probably put Korematsu in there. You'd put a couple other, you'd definitely put what was the Roger Taney, the slavery one? I can't remember, but I'm forgetting the name of the case now. What's it called? Dred Scott. Yes, thank you. I don't know why it went out of my head. But you'd certainly put the Roe versus Wade decision up there among the worst decisions of a court in the history of the United States. Please God, it will be overturned before too long. But that even overturning that case doesn't end a great battle that's going on in our culture about human life and about the meaning of human life. And so we see a growing acceptance of a eugenics mentality that we need to straighten out the gene pool of the human race. And among the ways to do that, as our guest, Dr. Angela Franks, has just been describing to us, is contraception. Abortion is also certainly part of, I suppose there's two ways to think about this. One, accepting abortion means that you're already on the road to accepting eugenics, but also eugenics, one of the ways of accomplishing the eugenic task is abortion.
Yeah, and so that actually Alan Guttmacher, who worked with Planned Parenthood for a long time, recognized that really early. So he was advocating for abortion in the 1940s, when not a lot of people were that bold. Precisely because it was such an inefficient means of eugenic control. He worked for a while in poorer neighborhoods in Baltimore, I think it was, and his wife said in an interview, "Oh yeah, we would see, that the poor families were having more kids than they should, and like they wanted abortion and contraception as essentially a solution to poverty." So it's like a lot of people wouldn't consider themselves eugenicists. They wouldn't identify as a eugenicist, but the mentality that we deal with human problems by eliminating the people who would have those problems, that's a eugenic mentality, because it says the problems have their root in the people somehow, in some kind of innate, deterministic way. If instead of recognizing that there's other better ways to deal with poverty or with disability, that instead of killing people with disabilities, which in fact they've mostly done in Iceland, for example, like I don't think there's been Down syndrome children in Iceland, I think, for a long time, right? So like that's one way of solving the problem of disability, but it of course isn't solving it at all. It's just addressing it's like a shortcut, right? And we love shortcuts, but it's this brutal, violent shortcut. So that's what we do in this society.
It's a kind of market-based eugenics now, though. Like you'd almost say the old eugenics is a socialist eugenics. The government would accomplish this. Now we sell it to people as a good that, you should get rid of this child. And so it's by a lot of individual choices that we are missing many beautiful brothers and sisters who have Down syndrome. They're just not here with us in the world. Not because the government says they can't, but because we've sold a eugenic mentality to individuals.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few laws in the books, maybe state laws, I think, that, and certainly different countries have some laws that promote eugenic abortion in the case of disability. But you're right, it's not like the Nazis are pounding on our door demanding that we do anything. We're doing it because we want to escape what we consider to be a grave difficulty, a grave expense, or, it's coming out of this, bottom up. It's a bottom up phenomenon instead of this top down phenomenon. And that's the kind of thing that John Paul II called a culture of death. That's what he meant by a culture of death, that
right.
Obviously government plays a role, and we know that with laws, that they do educate people's morality. So government plays a role, but it's a lot broader than just what our laws are. It has to do with how we think and how we form our institutions and how we view people and society.
888-3187-884. We're talking about eugenics and contraception this hour with our guest, Dr. Angela Franks. You can't talk about this without at least mentioning one time racism, that there's a racist element to the eugenic mentality.
Yeah, and it's different So, a lot of people, because of Nazism, just immediately equated eugenics with just straight up anti-Semitism, or especially a virulent version of it. And that narrative doesn't fit the historical facts because, for example, Sanger's doctors that worked in her first clinics, there was a husband-wife couple that were Jewish, and they were also eugenicists. They published in eugenic magazines and that kind of thing. And so it's not a simple, racism is a distinct phenomenon from eugenics, but I think you might find eugenicists who don't include race, and so they're not racist.
Right.
But you're probably not going to find racists who aren't eugenicists. So in that sense, there can be a lot of overlap between the two. But it bleeds so easily into racism because eugenics is this mentality that you have to measure up in some kind of biological or quantifiable way. And so the quantifiable way might be, an IQ test or an ability to earn a certain income or, something like that, which is just so similar to a racist mentality, which says you have to measure up by being a certain race. And in all of these isms, they refuse to recognize that the human person has a dignity that's inalienable, that's given by God, and that's not dependent on anything that's quantifiable or extraneous or extrinsic, like race or IQ or whatever.
888-318-7884. You've written a book, Dr. Angela Franks, about Margaret Sanger. She's the founder of Planned Parenthood. There's some fractures in the comfort level with Margaret Sanger at some Planned Parenthood locations, however.
Yeah, we had this really interesting phenomenon this summer where the Manhattan affiliate of Planned Parenthood, as far as I can tell, went rogue. I don't think this was a top-down order. I think they went rogue and basically admitted that Sanger was a eugenicist, that she was a liability to the organization, that they needed to just cut ties. I mean, obviously she's been dead for decades, but they're still giving, or at least they have been giving, Margaret Sanger awards. I think they call them the Maggie Award to people that, like Hillary Clinton got one year, people that they wanted to honor. And they always use for their fundraising the fact that they are the oldest American reproductive rights organization because they trace their founding back to 1916 when Sanger founded that first birth control clinic. But that means by claiming that mantle of, we've been here the longest, they're also claiming that they're that eugenic organization that Sanger founded. And when she said all those eugenic things in the teens and 20s and 30s, she was saying it as their leader. And so you can't have it both ways. And of course, like, nothing will really change in Planned Parenthood until it gets out of minority neighborhoods and, stops targeting minority and poor people, which is really the residue of Sanger's eugenic legacy, of Sanger's eugenic thinking. And they're not willing to do that yet. But there has been this reckoning, at least beginning with their history, which is a good thing.
Again, our number, 888-318-7884. Dr. Angela Franks is our guest. She's a theologian, speaker, and writer, and professor of theology at St. John's Seminary in Boston, which makes you feel good about the formation of priests in Boston. They must be doing something right there. She's written a couple of, one of the books is Margaret Sanger's Eugenic Legacy, The Control of Female Fertility. The other book, Dr. Franks, you're going to have to remind me of. I forgot.
Contraception and Catholicism.
Contraception and Catholicism. Okay, so that gives me an opening to ask you what I wanted to ask. Okay, we need a vision that's counter to the eugenic vision, then, because it is a very tempting vision in a way. The eugenic view is one where maybe the person might say there'll be much less suffering in the world. The human genome is improved. People have proposed it as you said, like in Iceland, we've cured. They actually have said this, the Icelandic government, we've cured Down syndrome. We have no cases of Down syndrome. There, you can see why that's seductive. What is the contrary Catholic vision that can compete with that?
The alternative, I think, is really between this mentality of control and a mentality of receptivity. Those are really our alternatives, and it has to do with how we view the body in general. It's not only, but I think fertility is an especially neuralgic point. It's like a really sensitive topic for a lot of people, because when it comes to your fertility, you're talking about your future. You're talking about how you're going to spend your time for, at least 6 years before your kid goes to school or something like that. I mean, it's talking about, it affects your finances. And so it's something that is very personal to people. And so it's, in a sense, the last holdout in for even for Christians in trusting God, right? It's like, I'll maybe trust God with all the other things in my life, but I'm going to hold on tight to my fertility because, like, that's, the thing that really matters. And so we try to manage our fertility chemically or technologically. But the thing is, first of all, it doesn't work 100%. I mean, contraception fails all the time, which is one reason why increased contraceptive use is correlated with increased abortion, because contraceptions fail. So there's that. But it's also this larger mentality that, really views the body as a technological problem to solve. Yeah. And that's just not an adequate understanding of the human body. It's like it's this very materialistic understanding of what it means to have a body, to be embodied. And so what the church proposes instead is this receptivity, which means first and foremost, we're accepting our body and the fact that it has qualities like, hopefully, if you're healthy and everything's working, fertility, right? Like, fertility is a sign of the health of your reproductive system. And instead of fighting technologically the way we do with contraception, what the church proposes is that we accept it and work with it, which is what something like natural family planning tries to do. Or instead of just trying to shut down the body's fertility technologically, it tries to work with the body's fertility and work with the periods of infertility in order to time sexual intercourse. And so to have some measure of knowledge, and knowing what's going on with your body, but still really being open to the fact that as a fertile human being, a woman might get pregnant, and that's it's a much better attitude to have that acceptance of that fact than to just be fighting it all the time.
And pregnancy is a feature, not a bug of a woman. That is not,
yeah. It's not a disease, and it's sometimes talked about in literature, and especially population control literature, as a disease, really. And it's not, as I think as Janet Smith says, conceiving a baby means something's gone right with the act of sex, not that something's gone wrong. And so as adults, this is a very John Paul II kind of idea, as responsible, intelligent adults, what we have an obligation to do is to accept the fact that a fertile human being might actually get pregnant. A fertile woman might get pregnant, and work with that instead of just pretending like it's something that just shouldn't happen to me just because I don't want it to happen to me.
888-318-7884 is our number. 888-318-7884. Our guest is Dr. Angela Franks. We're talking about eugenics and contraception, and I can tell you what's happening, and it always happens on these shows where we talk about these intellectually and morally challenging topics. It's going to be 1 million calls in the last 15 minutes. So I'm telling you, call now. We're going to take a little break. Perfect time to pick up the phone and call with your question for Dr. Angela Franks. She's a professor of theology at St. John's Seminary in Boston. Eugenics and contraception is our topic. 888-31-TRUTH.
We're waiting for your call. Grab that line and get on board.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, is one of the most courageous leaders in the church, known for his outspoken support of unborn life, Orthodox faith and morals, and reforming Catholic institutions. In his groundbreaking new book, Light and Leaven, he offers a forthright perspective on the state of the church today and calls on the lay faithful to meet its challenges boldly, touching on topics including parish renewal, the centrality of the Eucharist, the need for prayer and silence in a noisy and distracted age, and the battle between good and evil in the church and world. Bishop Strickland's wise insights and evident love for souls will inspire and edify you. To order your copy of Light and Leaven, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We've got a Superstar Friday lineup for you. In the second hour, we're going to talk about something that you might think, well, that's not something I want to think about or talk about. We're going to talk about your death. And we're going to talk about the long Catholic tradition of memento mori, remembering your death, and how that tradition actually brings a great deal of vibrancy to each day. It's actually a very helpful spiritual practice, and we'll talk about that with a former atheist, now Pauline's sister, who is promoting the idea of memento mori. This hour, we're talking about the eugenics mentality. We're talking about eugenics and contraception with our guest, Dr. Angela Franks, who teaches theology at St. John's Seminary in Boston. There are tons and tons of people on the line, a fact that I did not know about when I went to the break, so I apologize, Dr. Franks. All these people have been waiting to talk to you, and I didn't realize. Let's go to Elizabeth in St. Petersburg, Florida, listening on the EWTN app. Elizabeth, go ahead with your question for Dr. Angela Franks.
Hello. I am 55 years old. I've been diagnosed with MS since I was 30. I'm living out of a power chair. Sometimes I can transfer to bed or into the bathroom, but sometimes I almost fall down, and I get to know the fire department guys that come and help me out.
Oh, yeah.
So people around me, they say, oh, no, you don't have anything to worry about. Nobody's going to convince you to euthanize yourself. I will have bad moments, very dark moments where I'll say, I'm done. I am done. And when you go and have those dark moments, dark moods, you're going to be easily convinced you're going to do everybody the favor and sign off and let them euthanize me. I live alone. I've got to get long-term care in, but I'm frightened because it could be me.
Elizabeth, God bless you. Thank you for that call. I'm going to let Dr. Franks respond, and we'll come back to you, Elizabeth. Dr. Franks, your response to Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you so much. Elizabeth, you put that so well, that's exactly the problem with things like physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, is that people who are sick and who might be, or depressed sometimes there's depression that comes along with serious disability or illness that's not getting treated, that those people can be very vulnerable to being persuaded to do the easy thing, and they're often concerned about other people, that other people will find me a burden. And so the first thing I want to say is that we all have the right to be a burden on other people. We have been a burden on other people. We will continue to be a burden on other people. There's nobody can say that, well, I don't want anybody to ever be a burden on me. You're just not allowed to say that. It's part of being human that we're in this thing together. One really important thing for people in your situation, I think, would be to find someone, maybe it might be through your larger Catholic circle, if you're Catholic, or people, if you know people of faith, to find someone who might be willing to be your healthcare proxy. It does not have to be a family member, especially if you're worried about what a family member might do. And a healthcare proxy is someone who, if you're incapacitated or ruled to be unable to make your own decisions, they'll be able to make those for you legally. It needs to be somebody, though, who's got a pretty strong spine and who knows your convictions about wanting to live, and who's going to really be willing to go to bat for you in those kinds of situations. So that's probably the single most important thing you can do. And the second thing you might consider is trying to find a disability advocacy organization. There used to be a group, Not Dead Yet. I don't know if they're still around, but that people who are disabled who really advocate for the rights of people with disabilities.
Elizabeth, how does all that sit with you?
That's great. It gives me a direction where I will feel safer and not have those dark moods so often. If I know, I can build myself a support system.
Well, praise God for that. I really have to say, Elizabeth, too, thank you so much for calling, because your voice is extremely important in breaking through, I think, some of the willful blindness we have around physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, and just refusing to see in our society what that does to people like yourself suffering from multiple sclerosis and the fear and insecurity, and really it represents a cruelty. So, Elizabeth, thank you very much for your call.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Dr. Angela Franks is our guest. We're talking about the eugenics mentality, the growing eugenics mentality, and it is all interrelated, isn't it? You can't talk about it you end up talking about abortion, you end up talking about contraception, and now you end up talking about euthanasia and suicide. It's of a piece.
Yeah, it's that culture of death thing. John Paul II really understood it.
He did indeed, yeah. Micah in Georgia next, listening on AM 690. Micah, are you there with us?
Hi, I am.
Thank you very much for your call. Go ahead with your question for our guest, Dr. Angela Franks.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Franks. I just want to say I think you're very brilliant and really been enjoying listening to you. I'd like to ask you a question about overpopulation, because I think that's an important factor in this discussion. So, in modern times, isn't birth control a logical defense against overpopulation? Because the Earth does have very finite resources, such as land and food. And I feel like we'll soon see the consequences of unchecked growth if those things aren't taken into consideration. So I was wondering how this fits into your perspective.
Hello?
Okay, thank you, Micah. Dr. Franks.
Great. That's a great question. So, an overpopulation was a huge motivation, especially beginning in the 60s and 70s, though people are already talking about overpopulation in the 1920s. And it's interesting that the overpopulation organizations were headed by the same people who headed the eugenics organization. So that already should give us pause, that it was the same people concerned supposedly. So, they saw population control as eugenics with a passport. So there's that historical fact. But to get to like the more factual question you're asking, what we find is that when you have situations of, for example, famine or so where resources aren't getting to people, it's usually not the case that there is simply just insufficient resources, period. Like there's just not enough food. There usually is enough food because some countries that have organized and advanced agriculture produce a surplus of food. They're producing more food than they need to feed their own people. And so the problem is mostly a matter of distribution of those resources. And usually what happens, famines tend to be really devastating and deadly when there are either oppressive governments in place that are keeping the resources from getting to the people, or just don't have the infrastructure to try to do it, or when there's cases of war, especially civil war. And often in cases of civil war, one side will use a famine to try to essentially undermine and kill the other side. And so even with our current population, we don't actually have insufficient resources to feed everyone, which is great news. Like it used to be predicted, Malthus back in the 18th and 19th century said that, at some point, our rate of food production is going to be outstripped by our population growth. And that prediction was not even true in his own lifetime, because there was an agricultural scientific revolution in his own lifetime. And it is much less true today, that we really have been blessed to have the advancements that can feed the world's population.
Micah, I'm interested in your response to that.
Okay, well, I would say that fits in with the response to Malthus, which would be the cornucopia theory, which says that human ingenuity will overtake any population constraints, like with food. So that does make sense. But I guess with an unchecked population growth, in a world that didn't have birth control, I would still be worried about the outbreak of disease and whatnot. But I suppose maybe science could would meet the challenge, perhaps.
Dr. Franks?
Yeah. That's so it's often happened that science has met the challenge. Another interesting thing to contemplate is that some of the places in the world that have the highest population density, which means the most number of people per square foot or square mile, those places include places like Great Britain, Japan, not Japan anymore, but Taiwan, it's places often that are islands. So, it makes sense that the population density be very high. But those are not places that we think of as places that are falling prey to disease and destitution, and because of their population density. So population density per se does not actually lead to those problems. It doesn't necessarily lead to environmental destruction, because environmental destruction often depends on the kind of government that's there, and the kind of controls that they have on things like air quality and waste distribution and so forth. So it's interesting that there's not actually that kind of correlation that we were taught to think there was between high population density and disease and destitution.
Thank you, Micah, so much for the call. Dr. Franks, I have become convinced in my own life, because as a child of the late 60s, early 70s, watching Walter Cronkite on the CBS News night after night talk about the population bomb, Paul Ehrlich's book, and then seeing that Dr. Ehrlich's predictions, virtually none of them came true. And a whole generation, my generation, was panicked about the population bomb. These future worries, there's no reason why we should be imprudent. We're not counseling imprudence, but often, especially given the way media works to try to get us to click on or turn on their programming, these worries are greatly exaggerated. They were exaggerated after Paul Ehrlich published the really foolish book, The Population Bomb.
Yeah, and we're just told that that's fact, and it wasn't even fact, and it's never been fact in his own lifetime, and it's still not fact. I mean, Paul Ehrlich, he was an entomologist. He studied bugs.
Yeah.
Maybe he was an excellent entomologist, but he predicted America would be hit by a widespread famine in the late 1970s. I mean, there's a lot of negative things you could say about the 70s, but the fact that the idea that America
horrible.
had some widespread famine is not one of them. And so, yeah.
Right. But I do think we're raising our children with these anxieties because there's something weird about the media preferring, well, I don't know if it's that weird, actually. It kind of just makes sense. They preferring panic over reasoned, prudent preparation for the future.
Yeah, and there's this sad history in the environmental movement of being connected. Father Richard John Newhouse did this before he was a Catholic, and I think he was still fairly communist actually when he wrote this book. But he wrote this book on population where he showed how you could find this environmentalist rhetoric that was always connected to aristocracy. Was always something a little bit anti-human in the environmental movement, where you had like super rich people like Ted Turner back in the day, and who owned at one point as much land that was almost like the size of the state of Wyoming.
Yeah, and
he was this diehard population control environmentalist. You kind of got the sense is like he didn't want too many people cluttering up his view or something. It's just so we have to be willing to examine those ideas and see like what might be lying underneath.
Yeah, there's a profound anti-humanism in the kind of environmentalism. I mean, our Pope now is counseling us to love nature and to take care of nature, and God bless him for that. But the kind of environmentalism that says weird things like humans are a virus on the face of the earth, we're actually a disease that's destroying the earth, that's profoundly anti-human.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll take a quick break, right back with more on eugenics with our guest, Dr. Angela Franks.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Do you love praying for people? Have you ever wanted to use your gift of prayer to share Jesus with others and build up the body of Christ? Start a public prayer station with St. Paul Street Evangelization. Listen to people's needs, pray with them, or invite them to meet you at church. St. Paul Street Evangelization can help you get started. Find out how at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
Fallen away Catholic years and years ago, doing my own thing, and my mom and dad never gave up on me, and I know it was the Holy Rosary, and they kept after me. Philip, pray your rosary, and eventually I did. I'm a member of the Knights of the Immaculata, Maximilian Kolbe's group. I'm with the Legion of Mary, and I haven't stopped leading the rosary in nursing homes, thanks be to God.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. And I have to say, as a Catholic, one of the things that I suppose find encouraging about the Holy Spirit as the guide and leader of the church is that on some of these really modern, nutty ideas like eugenics, the church has been the one who's been there to say, come on, come back to reality. And our guest, Dr. Angela Franks, is one of those people. She teaches theology at St. John's Seminary in Boston, and she's here to talk with us about foolish ideas like eugenics. Not just foolish, but in many ways destructive and even evil ideas. You're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Up next, we go to Lincoln, Nebraska. Listening on Spirit Catholic Radio is Arturo. Arturo, your question, please, for Dr. Angela Franks.
Hi, good afternoon. A few minutes ago, I I heard a comment about eugenics not being related to racism. Kind of put me to think a little bit about that specific perspective. Because if we think about it, in reality, it's not the skin what makes us consider some other human beings different than us. But in reality, people with disabilities, consider different.
Oh.
That is some type of racism that is included there. Because if you think about it, all of us, as in general, we're a race. We're a human race. Now, the color of pigmentation of our skin is different, but in reality, disconnecting people that practice eugenics from racism, I think is giving them, being too kind to them. Why? Because I think in reality, having problems with some specific characteristics of race, disregarding what kind of a pigmentation of the skin is, includes racism for being different. In this case, disabled. So I kind of disagree a little bit, with all due respect, of course. But in my heart, I feel that it's correlated with racism.
That eugenics is correlated with racism, Arturo.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, Dr. Franks?
Sure. Yeah, you're absolutely allowed to disagree with me, Arturo. No problem. Yeah.
But you get a lower grade, Arturo. I just want you to know that. Yeah.
My students would feel that fear for sure. So my point is that historically, when people are eugenicists, they say that some people are not as worthy of human beings based on a set of characteristics that they think are in the genes. And so what differs among eugenicists is what those characteristics are. In other words, what their criteria is. And so some eugenicists are completely focused on race. And it's like race kind of is all that they think about when they think about eugenics. Other people, and really Sanger, to my mind, was actually more in the second category. Other people are really hyper-focused on disability, intelligence, and poverty. And race is an afterthought or not really there at all. And part of this is because we have to realize because of the Nazis, we think of all eugenicists as being like arch right-wingers. But in fact, Sanger's crowd were really very left-wing. I mean, people use the word progressive, but this was like the progressive era in the early 1900s. And they were like completely in that progressive mode of promoting, a lot of them were part of the Communist Party and were promoting sexual revolution. And people like that tended to consider themselves very racially progressive as well, and actually didn't talk that much about race. Now, the fact that Sanger was concerned about the poor, though, of course, means that, in fact, the people she was targeting were racial minorities in America, as well as poor whites. So in fact, on the ground, generally racial minorities get impacted by any eugenic program. It's more a matter of what people are emphasizing.
Thank you, Arturo. I appreciate the call. Where are we going? Let's go to John in Omaha, Nebraska. Another call from Nebraska, also listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. John, go ahead with your question for Dr. Angela Franks.
Hi, Dr. Franks and Cy.
Hi, John.
Related to Margaret Sanger, in one of her books and her interviews with Mike Wallace, it's on YouTube, she refers to blacks and minorities as the weeds of the earth. And I kind of got the conception that she was a Nazi, but that's maybe just my perception. But in my dealings with an older black woman who I worked with and loved working with a lot, we're still really good friends, I was amazed, and so was she, that I exposed to Margaret Sanger and the Planned Parenthood beginnings. And she had no idea of this woman's plight against the black people. And then obviously the political parties that supported Margaret Sanger. And she was stunned that this was not only hidden, but nobody had ever really put it out there and tried to expose it. Is there a way we can still do that today?
Well, you're doing it, John, at the moment. You are. I mean, Planned Parenthood has killed more black people than any other institution in the history of the United States. I don't think there's any dispute about that. And a lot of that was intentional. Dr. Franks, how do you respond to John?
Yeah. So on the historical question about Sanger, she voted communist most of her life when she voted in presidential elections. In fact, I think her books were burned in Nazi Germany. So she definitely never considered herself a Nazi. She did not. So I don't remember in the Wallace interview that she talked about blacks as weeds, but it's been a while since I've looked at it. But
I didn't remember it either, Dr. Franks. I remember watching that interview several times. I don't remember that in that interview.
Yeah, there's an internet quote, sort of pseudo quote floating around where she says that blacks are weeds that need to be eliminated or something like that. And that is not found in any of her writings. And she as far as blacks are concerned, she considered herself racially progressive. Now, she did have this Negro Project, and there's a letter that's quoted from that where she says, we don't want word to get out that we are trying to eliminate, I think that's the word used, the Negro population, and their minister, the colored minister, is the man to straighten their congregations out. And that's really the only kind of smoking gun, except the problem is it's really hard to interpret because it's not clear if she's saying we want to eliminate their populations and we don't want them to figure it out, or if she's saying we don't want to eliminate their populations and so we don't want them to misunderstand. And so it's actually it's to my mind, it's actually an insoluble question, whether the evidence to my mind points that she didn't really think of blacks in the terms of being the unfit. But so all that said, as has already been said, Planned Parenthood has been enormously destructive to the minority community, literally destructive, because it's in its DNA to target the poor. That's what Sanger created it for, was to target the poor and to bring them the kind of sexual liberation that she herself personally experienced and thought was fantastic. And she was very naive about any bad effects of this kind of behavior. And so what Planned Parenthood's done that, right? And it's instead of providing real solutions to poverty, to disability, to relationship abuse, there's been a number of it's been documented where Planned Parenthood has suggested to girls who have said that they're in relationships with older men, that's essentially statutory rape, that, there's been conversations recorded where Planned Parenthood has basically said, we'll give you the abortion. Well, what does that mean? She goes right back into this relationship, right? So they're not solving anybody's problems. All they're doing is killing people's babies. And what's left are all the problems that were there before. And so, yeah, it's absolutely the case that Planned Parenthood is not the friend of racial minorities.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Dr. Angela Franks is our guest. You might want to get her book. Let me go to the I forgot the title of the second book again. Margaret Sanger's Eugenic Legacy is the one that I do remember, The Control of Female Fertility, where you cover a great deal of what we've just discussed. The other book is
Contraception and Catholicism.
I'm going to learn that and remember it next time. Give us some hope. How can we today battle this not contraceptive but eugenic mentality that's coming up again?
Yeah, one of the best ways to do it is for first of all, people like we had today on this call, for people who have disabilities or serious illnesses, or for parents who are raising kids with disabilities, to talk about how these are valued, wonderful human beings who have a disease or a disability, but they're not simply defined by disease or disability. I think that's really important. And I think praying for people in these situations and then supporting pro-life organizations and pro-life causes that are really working to change our laws.
Thanks to everybody who called. Dr. Angela Franks, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you took the time to do this hour with us.
Thank you. It's great.
Yeah, the Catholic vision is a beautiful vision rooted in Christ, our Savior, who loves every single person, no matter their condition, their age, their color, their faith. And we do have to fight and get away from this eugenics mentality. Coming up next, we're going to talk about your death. We're going to talk about the Catholic practice of memento mori, remembering your death each day so that you will live your life to the fullest. We'll do that right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and today is the day that this week has been about as we get to the anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision. I mean, we've been through a terrible, traumatic election, a traumatic year of disease, and also some good government, some bad government, states not getting along with each other, not able to deliver federal government problems. I mean, it's been a tough time, and I think for many pro-life people, the fact that the elections didn't produce a pro-life result, in part because we don't have enough pro-life candidates. I think every single candidate, liberal or conservative, should be pro-life, and but that's not the case. And so we can start feeling down and dejected and concerned about the future. And, things are changing and upset. And are we making progress on the pro-life fund, or are we not making progress? We talked last hour with Angela Franks about the increase of this eugenics mentality, but we see it in many other areas as well, a kind of anti-life, anti-human mentality. And so we thought this week, as I've said several times this week, let's just go around the world and we'll find the sharpest, brightest Catholic women who can talk about a different image of womanhood than is being promoted in the secular media, a different image of motherhood, a different image of human life than is being presented in the secular media. And I feel hopeful after this week, and so I wanted to thank assistant producer Marie here for organizing it. You did all the organization, so thanks for organizing this week for us.
Yeah, thank you for trusting me with this project. I
didn't actually. I voted against you, but no, that's not really true.
Oh, I pitched the idea to Darren and Nick and Cy back in August, I think, and my feeling about it was that I just was so tired of hearing in media all of these people speaking about what supporting women looked like. And it's the kind of support that I don't want as a woman.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Thanks,
but no thanks.
The things that they're suggesting are not things that I think truly empower and free women. And so in January, typically a women's march happens. Typically the pro-life march happens. And, things are a little different because of the pandemic, but people are still having these conversations, and we wanted to bring the brightest women in the world, as Cy said, onto our show this week to talk about all of these different issues so that we can equip people with what is true about women and what is it that women truly deserve and truly deserve to be supported in. And there were so many great guests and highlights over the course of this week. I just learned so much listening to each of our guests. But I think the world that all of us Catholics are dreaming of is one where women can get pregnant and get support for themselves and their child and still get an education and have a future where men are called to be noble and providers, and where women are heard and seen, but they're also revered for staying in the home and taking care of their children.
Yeah.
A world that sees religious sisters as a beautiful thing and a major gift to the world. I mean, we saw with Sister Maristella on Wednesday the kind of work that they do. It is a love on another level.
Yeah.
They take in these women into their convent with their children in the first year of the child's life, and they, prepare them to get a job. They help them to get on their feet. They literally feed and shelter them. And anyway, I found all of these women to be so inspiring because not only do they know the truth and they shared it with us this week, but they are living out Christian love in such an inspiring way in their own lives.
Yeah, amen to that. And I really am grateful to you for having the foresight to months ago say, hey, this week in January, we should counter program everything else that's being said about women that week. And
Yeah.
you did a great job finding magnificent women. And the great thing about, I feel like this in many ways is a Catholic woman's moment, that the world needs to hear from Catholic women because, a couple of our guests talked about this new justice, Amy Coney Barrett. And just to see this incredible, intelligent, accomplished woman with a husband who treats her with respect and with all these children. And she's just, this is the kind of woman that we as Catholics, we see all the time at Mass with us, but we have this stereotype of the Christian woman as somehow oppressed or I don't know.
Just boring.
Or
Yeah.
I never thought of you as boring, Marie.
Oh, gosh.
So thanks, Marie. I just want to thank
Yeah.
you so much. And I'm sure our guests this hour will continue with that, with this magnificent example that we've seen. And you know what else I think about this week? I feel like, at least for me, I'm one of those people that's always like, who we need to have on is Monica Dumit or, one of the other.
Yeah.
But you just never get around of calling Australia and when can we schedule this?
Yeah.
But then once you do, you're like, oh, now we in a sense, the wheels are greased now.
Right.
It'll be easier next time to get her on.
Yeah, I can't wait for everybody to hear from Sister Teresa today. I think this topic is so important. And as Sai said, this has inspired us here to take advantage of all these powerful women speakers that we have in the Catholic world and bringing them to you guys in this programming. So let us know if this week has been something that you've enjoyed, because we're planning to bring a lot of these ladies back in the future for future shows.
Radio@Catholic.com is where you can send us an email, and Marie has to read all those emails. So radio@Catholic.com. Send 1,000 of them. Thanks, Marie. You're kind of a superstar, Marie. We continue with our week of magnificent and helpful Catholic women helping us to understand the truth about our humanity in the light of the person of Jesus Christ. And this hour, as I promised, we're going to talk about your death. And we're going to talk about the Catholic practice, was much more widespread in the Middle Ages, of remembering your death with the Latin words memento mori. That practice is titled often. And our guest is Sister Teresa Aletheia. She is a daughter of St. Paul. I'm going to tell you right now, don't turn off the radio. Former atheist, now a Catholic. Sister, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Seriously, a former atheist, now you're a daughter of St. Paul, encouraging people to remember their death so that their life will be full and beautiful?
Yes, seriously. God works in very mysterious ways.
He does indeed, sister. Thank you very much for being with us. This is my first time getting to meet you. Why memento mori? How did this become a practice that you're trying to encourage in other people?
Well, the way I describe it to other people is my conversion from not believing in God to believing in God was one of them, obviously, the major conversion of my life. But I beginning the practice of meditating on my death was a conversion within a conversion, and it really changed my life. And I began to do it in the convent. I was 7 years in the convent when I started to do it. And I had thought about it before, because our founder, Blessed James Alberione, actually kept a skull on his desk and meditated on his death every day. And so when I found that out, I thought, wow, that's super punk rock. I'm going to do that someday.
That is punk rock Catholicism right there.
Yeah, I was like, that's my brand. But I really didn't understand much about it. I just thought it was kind of cool. I was going to do that one day. And then 7 years into the convent, I was going through a really difficult time, and I felt inspired by the Holy Spirit to begin to do this. I really didn't know much about what I was doing. I didn't know much about the practice in the church. Really, it's something that's been so lost that I didn't even realize it was something that people regularly did up until maybe 50 years ago. It was a common devotion in the church. But once I started to do it, our sisters are called to use modern media to preach the gospel. So you'll find us on Twitter and on TikTok and on Facebook. And so I started to tweet about it. And I just said, day one with skull on my desk. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew that St. Benedict urged his monks to keep death daily before their eyes. So I thought, I'm not totally sure how to do this, but every day I'm going to take some time of prayer and I'm going to bring death to my mind and bring it to Jesus. And I thought I was going to end up tweeting about it maybe 2 weeks or something, but it ended up being over 500 days that I tweeted about it every single day.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And now it's been 3 years that I've been meditating on my death every day.
If you'd like to speak with our guest this hour, Sister Teresa Aletheia, you are welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. We're talking about the practice of memento mori, the Catholic practice of meditating on your death every day. If you'd like to ask about that, it's not one, I think the sister is completely correct in saying it's not one that people are as familiar with as they once were, this practice, but it is a long practice in the history of the Catholic Church. We'd love your calls, 888-318-7884. First, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back with those calls for our guest, Sister Teresa Aletheia.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Ever wonder about the power of prayer? St. John Chrysostom states that prayer and converse with God is a supreme good. It is a partnership and union with God. As the eyes of the body are enlightened when they see light, so our spirit, when it is intent on God through prayer, is illumined by His infinite light. Let God's infinite light be your guiding light. Ask Him to guide you daily in your prayer, work, recreation, home life with family, and your friendships.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Today we commemorate one of the worst decisions in the history of humanity, the Roe versus Wade decision. And all this week we've had brilliant women here with us to talk about a different way of thinking about our humanity, a different way of living our humanity, and in many cases specifically about living womanhood in the light of the teachings that Christ has given us and the church that Christ has given us. You're welcome to call 888-318-7884 as we talk this hour about memento mori, about the long Catholic tradition of meditating on death and what that means. Sister Teresa Aletheia is a daughter of St. Paul. She is here to help us do that. Punk rock is the word she used to describe this. Well, let me ask you about this. You have on your website, Pursued by Truth, a skull image. And, all right, I get it that that's punk rock, but how is that Catholic? Is that a bit morbid for a Catholic person?
Yeah, that's a common objection that I hear. And to be honest, when I first started meditating on my death, and I got a little ceramic skull for my desk, and I would look at it, and it would kind of give me the chills. It wasn't a good feeling when I looked at the skull. And so I can understand, death was not in God's plan. It was a result of sin. Death is an evil. So there is a darkness there that we're meditating on. But for Christians, when we meditate on death, we're not just looking at death. Yeah. It doesn't stop there. That's what I was looking at when I thought of death as an atheist. It was just death was the end. If you're a materialist, that's the end. You rot in the grave. That's the end of your life, and there's nothing beyond that. But for us, there is something beyond that. So for the symbol of the skull, and this was something that it was a conversion that slowly happened over time, that I began to look at that skull and to bring to mind the resurrection of the body, and to think of that amazing moment at the end of time when our bodies are going to just rise from their graves, and like our skulls are going to just pop out of our graves, and we're going to we're going to rise. And so to me and to Christians, that skull is actually a hopeful symbol. And it's not something that's common in the U.S., but in Europe, you'll see skulls in churches and in imagery in churches, very often with a crown to symbolize victory, or wings to symbolize eternal life. So for Christians, it really has been a hopeful symbol for many, many centuries.
Sister Teresa Alethea is our guest. You're welcome to call. We're talking about the devotion, the memori. Can you say it for Memento Mori? Thank you. Friday afternoon just got in me. We're talking about the Memento Mori devotion. 888-318-7884. The number already on the line. Some folks. So let's get to some calls. That's all right with you, sister? If we go to the phones. Mm-hmm. By the way, you're a daughter of St. Paul. You are your ministry is media. That's what you all do.
Exactly. Yeah, we're called to use the most modern and efficacious means to spread the gospel of media. This question, our caller, it turns out, didn't want to go on the air, just wanted me to ask the question for her. Patty in Oklahoma, listening to EWTN Channel 130 on Sirius XM satellite radio. I do frequently think about death, she says, but not in a productive or helpful way. I think about how I could do more for people when I die. I look forward to this. Is this weird or wrong? To look forward to death is, obviously it needs to be in a healthy and productive way. But I wouldn't say that there's anything wrong with the way that she's thinking of it, because she's specifically saying that when she dies, she'll be able to pray for people in the communion of saints. I'm assuming that's what she means by, I'll be able to do more for them in heaven. And that is, you do see that looking forward to death in the lives of the saints. St. Paul says in Philippians 1:21, to live is Christ and to die is gain. And I call that kind of the memento mori gold standard. Uh-huh. I'm really not at the point where I'm looking forward to death, to be quite honest. But I have seen it in some of my sisters as they're getting closer to their death. They have this desire for it. They have a desire to be embraced in the arms of Jesus. And so that's one of my memento mori goals.
Is to
I'm
get
not there yet. But yeah, I think meditation on death and thinking about it can actually help us to move towards really a desire for heaven. It kind of feeds the fire of our desire for heaven.
Can I ask you? Thank you, Patty, for the question. Can I ask you a how-to question then? Like, I think Sister is right. I want to take up this ancient practice of meditating on my own death in order to live a fully Christian life. How do you do it? Practically, what do you do?
Yeah, and that was a question that I got a lot, and it was actually something that I had to kind of discover over time, but also I did a lot of research kind of in the lives of the saints and in the writings of the saints and how they would describe doing it. And so our sisters have published several resources that I'm the author of. I have a Lenten devotional and a journal, and a prayer book on all of the last things to help people to enter into this practice, because there aren't that many resources anymore. That we have Alphonsus Liguori's Preparation for Death. That's a classic. St. Robert Bellarmine wrote The Art of Dying. But there's very few books out there that can help people. There's kind of intellectual books that you can read about dying, but not anything that can really help people to pray with it. And so one thing that I really encourage people to do is just to integrate it into your daily examen. If you do a daily examen, that's a perfect time in your day to just remind yourself and to bring it before Jesus. It's really important to do this in the context of prayer, just to say, if I died today at the end of this day, or if I died tomorrow morning, what would I think of this day in light of that? It helps you to examine your day much more efficaciously, because you can think, wow, I'm grateful to God for all of the graces that He's given me and all the things that He's given me, but I want to live up to those graces in a more tomorrow. And it can really give an urgency to your examinations and examens, because you're reminding yourself, really, death could come at any time. It's not necessarily going to come in old age. It could come tomorrow. It could come in a car accident. It could come on walking across the street. It's something that could come suddenly, and are we ready?
888-318-7884 is our number. We're talking about memento mori, the practice of meditation upon one's death. 888-318-7884. It does feel to me like in the last year, with a deadly virus around, people have thought about death differently than before. Some have called us and just told us explicitly, I've never thought about my own death in this way. Have you found that?
Yeah, I really believe that the inspiration that I received in 2017 was a preparation for this year, because the resources that our sisters came up with, were something that helped people through this year, but also me personally, it helped me so much that I have been meditating on my death before this year, because this whole year has been a memento mori. But I think we can think about death in a productive, and Patty mentioned that, there are ways to think about death that's productive, and there are ways to think about death that's destructive. So, and I've seen that in the culture, everyone's thinking about death right now. But are they thinking about death in a good way and in a way that is helping them to become better? Or are they living kind of motivated by those fears of death?
Right.
And you could see that in the behavior and in the anxiety, and not to say that it's very normal to be fearful of death. But I think that meditation on death can help us through events like this. And it can help us to put it into perspective and to always put Jesus at the center.
Sister Teresa Aletheia is our guest. She is a daughter of St. Paul. Up next, Julie in Omaha, Nebraska, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Julie, go ahead with your question for Sister.
Hi, I do have a question. I wondered when she began to do this, what kind of changes she first noticed in her day-to-day life, and why she continues to do it, how it opens up different insights, and also, where do you get a skull?
All right, very good.
That's a good question. And it's actually, this has been such an amazing journey for me, because there's really been, and I think it's for each person, you have different movements in this journey, but at first, I felt a lot of fear, and I like to tell people who start this practice that it's normal to feel a lot of anxiety at the beginning, because we're not used to thinking about death. We're used to really putting it at the back of our minds and going through our day and trying not to have that thought. We kind of repress that thought as much as possible. So it is normal to feel fear. And we're so blessed, though, because in the context of prayer, we can bring that fear to Jesus. And so at the beginning of my meditation on death, I would think of my death, and St. Ignatius urges people to imagine themselves on their deathbed. So I would do that when I was meditating on death. And I would feel very fearful, but I would bring that fear to Jesus. And I have to say that it took some time and regular meditation on death. And that's what I urge people to do this regularly, because it really is a practice we're urged to do regularly, and not just occasionally kind of freak ourselves out and get scared and then go back to our normal life. But if we do it regularly, after time, I really did feel a decrease in my fear of death. And I also felt like it put things in perspective. It continually puts things in perspective for me. So whether I'm making a big decision or a small decision, if I imagine myself on my deathbed, like St. Ignatius urges, it really does make me think, okay, I know what God's will is for me in this moment. It's much more, it helped me to feel a lot of clarity. But it also, and this was, I would say, a couple years into the practice, I really started to face my weakness. And because this is a practice among modern day Stoics that's really encouraged. So there's a lot of modern day Stoics out there. If you Google Memento Mori, they meditate on their death regularly. And it's kind of a discipline for them. It's something that they kind of buckle their boots and they do it, and they grit their teeth and they do it. But for Christians, we really have to face our weakness in the midst of it, our fear, our mortality, the contingency of our life. So there's really so many movements in it, but each of those movements I've found have brought me closer to Jesus.
Julie, what do you think of that?
I think that's very insightful, especially when she pointed out, weighing that in your mind in your day-to-day and your big decisions. I also wonder, is there any particular way to share this with others that doesn't come across harsh or judgmental, but just simply, hey, this is neat?
Yeah. Sister?
Yeah, our sisters are actually doing an email Lenten series. So it's drawn from my Lenten devotional, but it has different reflections in it. And you can share those emails with people and just encourage them to try it out. You could give them my Lenten devotional if you think they wouldn't be put off by it. But the Lenten series can be found at pauline.org/memento-mori-email.
And we'll put that on our show notes. You can also visit Sister's website, pursuedbytruth.com. We have to take a quick break. Back with more with Sister Teresa Aletheia on Memento Mori.
Catholic Answers Live.
If you spend any time on Twitter, Facebook, or mainstream media, you're probably familiar with the litany of slogans that skeptics employ to rescue you from the foolish belief that God exists. The constant onslaught seems to leave people with the idea that they have no alternative but to embrace atheism. How can a Christian respond? In One Less God Than You, John DeRosa breaks down 20 of the most common atheist challenges and shows you how to craft effective answers. Atheism is more aggressive and widespread than ever. Read One Less God Than You and prepare yourself to respond with the joyful truth that God is real. To get your copy of One Less God Than You, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
To many people, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I'll give you the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Have you subscribed to the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter? This is Catholic Answers Live host Cy Kellett, and I want to tell you about our new weekly newsletter full of behind-the-scenes information and facts you need to know about the show. It's easy to sign up. Just visit CatholicAnswersLive.com and look for the newsletter sign-up box on the front of the page. It's a great way to keep up to date with what's happening with the show and see what's coming in the days ahead, delivered weekly into your inbox. Sign up today for the Catholic Answers Radio Club newsletter and see what you've been missing. Go to CatholicAnswersLive.com. Our guest this hour is a daughter of St. Paul. They're the Pauline sisters. You can find them online. They do all kinds of great work in media. As a matter of fact, I've noticed that sometimes our social media people get into conversations with their social media people on the Twitter and the Facebook and all that kind of stuff, because we have a very similar mission in a way, to be everywhere where media is available, to proclaim the truth about Jesus Christ and his church, and they do a wonderful job of that, so you might want to get to know the Pauline sisters. Our number here is 888-318-7884. Our guest is Sister Teresa Aletheia, and she is as I said, one of the Pauline sisters, has been for about a decade, but for a large part of her life as a woman religious, she has been practicing this ancient Catholic practice of memento mori, of remembering one's death and meditating upon one's death each day. You can find her at pursuedbytruth.com. Pursuedbytruth.com is where you can look up what she is up to. And you're welcome to call right now here, 888-318-7884, if you'd like to talk about death. 888-318-7884. And it seems to me, sister, that one of the causes of our anxiety in this life is that we think we've got to make our dreams come true before our death. And that is exactly backwards. This is not the time or the place to make your dreams come true. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, something that the practice of memento mori has helped me to do is to accept my vocation. It wasn't something that came easily to me. I actually resisted it quite a bit. The first time I felt like God was inviting me to consider religious life, my response was, "What?" Like, not interested.
But he pursued you.
He did. But I do think that as a former atheist, I recognize that I carried with me many ways of thinking like an atheist, even after my conversion. And I recognize in many Catholics many ways of thinking and living like practical atheists in their regular lives. And one of the ways is that we do think that we have to fit everything into this life. And also that vocation can be seen as a waste. I can't tell you how many people said that to me, and how many of them were Catholic.
Wow.
It was very strange to me that some of my atheist friends were the most kind of, wow, that's cool. I'm like, that's hardcore. You do that. You do you. They didn't quite, obviously they didn't believe it, but there were Catholics who very faithful Catholics who were like, are you really thinking this through? Do you really, I mean, have you really, you should maybe try. They would kind of think that it was like a last resort.
Right.
And I think that's a sign of thinking like an atheist, really, that we think this life is all there is. And if you do think this life is all there is, then you do feel like, wow, religious life is missing out on some of those major parts of life. So poor her.
Right. That's sister, that's also true of the marriage vocation, that many people resist the marriage vocation even after they're married, because there's this anxiety about getting it all in this life. And the point of Christian life is it's the next life where you have everything, literally have everything. Stop worrying about it so much. It's fascinating to me to hear you connect that with vocation, and that the meditation on death makes it easier to accept your vocation because you can let go of the idea that you got to get it all done now.
Yeah, I really think Jesus, I was struggling with my vocation. It was 7 years into the convent when I started to meditate on my death. And I think that's why Jesus gave me this meditation, and why I try to spread it so much, because I think it helps us to think like Christians and to live like Christians and to live for heaven. So much of the eschatological context of our life, of our faith life, has been lost. And we can really be focused on this life and what we have to do in this life, which is important. But we have to live for heaven. That's what our life is about. And religious life completely loses its meaning if we don't believe in heaven. And I have to say, when I joined the convent, I believed in God, but I had a hard time really wrapping my head around heaven. And not to say that I still have wrapped my head around heaven, but meditation on death has really helped me to kind of concretize my belief in heaven and to connect it to God and to really look forward to that moment when I'm going to meet God.
You can find out about Sister's work with Memento Mori at pursuedbytruth.com. Remember your death. That's what Memento Mori is about. As Sister said, it's a very punk rock side of Catholic faith. You have a journal, or you encourage people to journal. How does that work in observing the Memento Mori devotion?
Yeah, the Lenten devotional has journal prompts, and then the journal can be used with that or separate. And in the journal, I like to help people to understand that this tradition really goes back all the way to the beginning of salvation history, when God says to Adam and Eve as they're leaving the garden, "You are dust, and to dust you shall return." Right. I think that's really grounding in our faith. We hear those words every Ash Wednesday: "You are dust, and to dust you shall return." And then all throughout Scripture, you hear exhortations to think of your death. So the journal has a lot of those quotations from Scripture, and then quotations from saints. Because as I researched more and more into this practice, I thought, I'm going to see if Saint so-and-so ever talked about this. And I have to tell you, I have not found a saint who doesn't talk about it. Yeah. It's like the power idea of the saints, to think on death and all of the last things, on judgment, on hell and heaven, and to keep those things in mind, because it kind of, it keeps your life, like, it keeps your fire alight. And I've really found that to be true for myself, too.
If you'd like to ask questions about Memento Mori of Sister Teresa Aletheia, 888-318-7884 is our number, 888-318-7884. So my children went to a Catholic school, and one time a sister came who was a missionary sister and talked to them, and one of my daughters pointed out, and I had never made this connection. She said, "What is a nun? I've never met one before." And I realized she's in Catholic school, but even Catholic schools, there are not women religious anymore. And it's it's a magnificent vocation that I feel like a lot of young women are not invited to because they don't even know women religious.
Yeah, I think that's the blessing of the internet is our sisters are very active on the internet, and it's a way that that kids who it used to be that every school was full of nuns, and now you could I meet many Catholic kids who have never met a nun before. I'm the first nun they've ever met. So yeah, it's hard because it's hard to think of religious life unless you have contact with it. Just the concept itself can be kind of off-putting and unattractive until you meet it and incarnated.
Right. And yet I would still, my daughters are young adults now, but I would be delighted if they ever said, I'm considering, a vocation to religious life. It's amazing to think that your vocation met with so much resistance from your Catholic friends. So give me and we're going to go back to calls and we're going to continue talking about Memento Mori, but you connected it with the idea of vocation. And I want you to give me the pitch. Why should I consider being a woman religious? Have you ever been asked to give that pitch before, or is this the first time? Because I don't want to just spring it on you.
No, yeah, I can do that.
Okay. Yeah. Why? Why consider being a woman religious?
I really think for myself, at least, I remember always having this feeling of everything not being enough. And the jobs that I was doing and the dating that I was doing and everything just didn't feel, it just felt like I wanted my whole life to be centered on Jesus. And I would go to daily mass and I went to regular adoration and I had a strong prayer life, but it just never felt like enough. And so I felt this attraction to giving my entire life to Jesus. And now I also at that same time felt a great repulsion to the idea. So it was an attraction that God had to really grow in me. So I think it's normal if you feel like when you think of religious life, you think, oh, I don't know, I don't think that's for me. But really, what made me decide to follow this call that I felt from God, even though I just was like, I don't know about that, was my love for Jesus. I just loved him so much, and I wanted to put him at the center of my life, and I wanted all of my love to go to him and to be kind of magnified by him. In religious life. And that's really what happens. My whole day revolves around him. My whole day revolves around prayer, around mass, and then around talking to other people about him. So, and I find a lot of, that's how I want to spend my life. We have a song that one of our sisters wrote that if I had 1,000 lives, I would give my life to him, every single one.
Sister, thank you so much. I appreciate that so much. Sister Teresa Aletheia is our guest. She is a daughter of St. Paul, one of the Pauline sisters. There are a bunch of folks on the line. If you want to call now, we could probably get you in as well with your question about Memento Mori, the Catholic practice that Sister is reviving in many ways, of meditating on your death as a way of living a fully Christian life. If you have questions about Memento Mori, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. We'll take a quick break, come right back with lots of calls for Sister Teresa Aletheia.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Don't forget to check out the latest episode of our podcast, Catholic Answers Focus. You can listen each week to the world's premier podcast on Catholic apologetics at CatholicAnswersFocus.com or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Catholic Answers Focus, now available at CatholicAnswersFocus.com.
We have a big problem. Our culture is dying, and souls are in danger of being lost. The answer is conversion to Jesus Christ in His church. St. Paul Street Evangelization is a Catholic organization, and we have hundreds of teams spreading the good news throughout the country. But we need your help. The harvest is great, but the laborers are few. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
She is one of the most beloved saints of all time, honored as the Saint of the Little Way.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
Saint Thérèse of Lisieux entered the Carmelite convent of Lisieux in 1888 and survived only 9 more years. Still, her extraordinary holiness and prayer life prompted her superiors to have her write an autobiography, The Story of a Soul. It became a spiritual classic.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We're getting we're in the final stages of what has just turned out to be a very blessed week here. Thanks to assistant producer Marie, who said, "Hey, let's talk to a bunch of brilliant Catholic women about their Catholic faith, about their Catholic life as we approach today, which is the anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision." And we're so grateful to all the women who agreed to come on and talk with us. This hour, we're talking with Sister Teresa Aletheia. Was that pretty good, right? Have you noticed I've stumbled over that almost every time I've said it? Sister Teresa Aletheia of the Daughters of St. Paul, the Pauline Sisters, here to talk about the Catholic devotion, Memento Mori, which has fallen into disuse, but Sister is making use of her time as a sister and as a savvy Catholic woman to promote the devotion to Memento Mori. 888-318-7884 is the number. Let's go to Jay in Arkansas Pass, Texas. No, Aransas Pass. I don't know what. I hope I'm reading that right. In Texas, anyway.
We're named for a pass in the ocean. Okay.
Oh, really? All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jay, with your question.
Yes, I was curious about whether or not she worked with hospice workers and with chaplaincy workers who are helping people at the last stages of life. I've been blessed to work as a hospice volunteer a number of different times and have had the privilege of being with 6 people who, as they died, they were not practicing Catholics. They were not Catholics at all. And so I was curious if your outreach has helped people look at how Catholics approach death.
Yeah, I have had several hospice workers reach out to me and say that that my ministry and the resources that we've provided have been helpful to them. I do know that for my own self, our sisters, I live in our mother house, so our older sisters are in the house, the convent where I live. And actually one of our sisters is dying right now, and we have a sign-up list to accompany our sisters when they are dying. So a sister is with them at every single hour. And so I've had the privilege of accompanying it's probably about 10 of our sisters at this point who have passed away. And I have to say that has been just a learning experience for me. It just the beauty of our sisters' lives, especially as they're nearing its end. And every death is different. And some of them are difficult and some of them are peaceful. But the hospice workers who come in and accompany our sisters have always said that they're struck by the peace in the room and the good, like the saints would always speak of praying for a good death. And I have to say that my sisters, even in the death throes and the difficulties, and it's not a a beautiful thing, but even in the midst of that, there's always this deep, deep peace. I honestly feel like I'm entering a tabernacle when I enter the room of a sister who's dying. There's such a presence of God. And I often wish that I could bring people into that experience, because I think that has one of the major things, in addition to my meditation on death, that has helped me not to fear death anymore, because
Wow.
our sisters have such beautiful, beautiful deaths.
Jay, what do you think?
Yeah, I can echo that because although I'm not actively in that ministry right now, it really helped me to deal with my own mortality and to look at the door going to the next chapter of my life completely differently. And I highly recommend everyone to be able to be with family or others as they die, because there is an opportunity for a closeness that's amazing. And I agree with her completely. You feel like you are in a completely different space, because when the soul passes and leaves, there's a part of you that's rejoicing and a part of you that wishes you could go too. You understand? So I'm very excited about her ministry, and it gives me a name for something. People make fun of those of us who are older, who don't fear death, but who look at what am I doing to make this the arc of my life complete.
Yeah, well, our society, we make fun of a lot of the best things and the deepest wisdom. So, Jay, God bless you. Thank you so much, and thank you for your work in hospice, accompanying people. Our guest is Sister Teresa Aletheia. She's promoting the devotion to Memento Mori. That is, remembering your death every day in order to prepare for the day, and for the week, for the month, and for the moment of your death. Betty in Columbus, Ohio, listening on St. Gabriel Radio, 820 AM is next. Betty, go ahead with your question for Sister.
Hi there. Just a brief background. When I was younger, I had quite a traumatic childhood, and I actually spent a lot of time when I was younger just kind of praying to Jesus, hey, anytime now. I was ready when I was really young, which I guess is kind of tragic, but it was very peaceful, just kind of I would think about it and think, okay, I'm going to go to heaven, whenever we can do this, because life was really traumatic. And I found peace in it, and it was not something I really obsessed about, but it was just something I thought of often and found peace in. As I got older and kind of processed, started to kind of experience the side effects of those childhood traumas, as they often do when you're young adult, and start processing them. It became more intrusive thoughts, and I kind of developed a huge fear around death. And I actually spoke to you guys last week about I had this vision of purgatory at one point, which I
remember,
kind of
yeah,
bring me more peace about it.
Yeah.
So I've kind of had this weird relationship with, I don't know, thinking about my death, and I just wonder if there shouldn't be some caution taken, especially perhaps with people who have a traumatic childhood, or if there are stories of people who have done this and maybe it goes the wrong way, just kind of a caution.
Yeah, maybe a person who suffers from depression who might have suicidal ideation. Sister, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I'm not a professional in that area, so I can't say that I'm speaking from any sort of expertise. But I have talked to some psychologists who have said that they use a method for people who have kind of an extreme fear of death that helps them to visualize it and enter into it. And I have heard from several people who have taken up meditation on death that it's helped them, that they did have intrusive and really kind of suicidal thoughts about it, and actually was helpful to them. But I say that with caution, because I do think each person has to be, we know ourselves and we know what we can take and what we're able to do, and if you know that you have those issues, it's good to have the accompaniment of someone who knows what they're doing. But I do think it can be helpful in some cases, and I have heard testimonials from people.
Yes, and I would just repeat, we say it all the time, but we'll say it again. If you suffer from thoughts of suicide, you got to get help. If the thoughts are pressing upon you now, go to the emergency room. but you do have to get help. And this suicidal depression is very often not a spiritual issue, but a physical issue, and you need to go get medical help. Betty, any other thoughts?
No, well, maybe a follow-up question, and I praise God. I am very far away from those SI times.
Right.
Thank you, Jesus. Like I'm so far away from it, but I agree with what you're saying. But
praise God.
I'm not dealing with that presently. I'm just kind of concerned. Like this was intriguing to me since I used it when I was younger, and I'm like, should I kind of and like I was considering that, like the purgatory vision that I had, like is this something that I'm kind of being drawn to consider and think about because I had built up such a huge fear about death. But I'm wondering, if I do kind of go about that, is there anybody, like I have a therapist, but like is there anybody in the church who would kind of like could I talk to my priest about like hey, can you kind of guide me in this? And or I don't know, is that something that I
we have a whole tradition of spiritual direction in the church, and it doesn't have to be a priest. Do you want to say anything about spiritual direction, sister?
Yeah, it's difficult to find a spiritual director, but if you look in your area, sometimes if you call your diocese, they'll have a list of people who you can call, and sometimes it's priests, but oftentimes it's lay people who are just trained in spiritual direction, and they would be definitely a good person to bring these things to. Also, something that's connected to meditation on death is devotion to the holy souls in purgatory. And maybe the Holy Spirit is inviting you to pray for the holy souls in purgatory. And that can be kind of your participation in this. Because when we pray for the holy souls in purgatory, they pray for us. And it's a really efficacious way to pray. So maybe that's what God is inviting you to now.
Sister, thank you. Betty, thank you. I hope you'll keep calling. You're a great caller. It's great to get the chance to talk with you. I want to try to get to as many as I can before we have to go. However, we're talking about Memento Mori, remembering your own death as a meditation, as a Catholic meditation with Sister Teresa Aletheia. Next up is Thomas in Fort Wayne, Indiana, watching on YouTube Live. Thomas, time is short, so you're going to have to get right to your question for Sister, okay?
I sure will. Thanks for taking my call. I was just curious, Sister, so about The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. I understand you haven't read it, but his essential point is basically that all of human civilization, or much of it anyway, is kind of it's one big defense mechanism, like an elaborate ploy to deny the fact that we know we're going to die one day. And so I know you're not like a psychoanalyst or anything, but I would encourage you to read it. It's extremely fascinating text, and from a theological point of view, you would enjoy it, I think. But I just wondered if you have any opinion or if you think there's any credence on the fact that a lot of what we do as human beings is basically just a big waste of time, and it ultimately is deflecting against our, ultimate vocation in terms of union with God. And if you think there's any credence to human civilization being a big elaborate kind of defense mechanism. Do you have
All
any
right,
thoughts?
Thomas. Thank you. Sister?
I do. I have read some. I've heard of Ernest Becker's book, and I haven't read it, but I have read some modern kind of retakes on that book, and I do think it can be twisted into becoming religion as a defense mechanism against death, and that's something that some atheist psychologists will say. I don't think that. I think that we can take this to maybe too far sometimes when we think of, like what you said earlier, just like everything that we do is a waste of time when you think of it in terms of life. And I actually don't think of eternal life, and I don't think that's necessarily the Catholic view of it, because union with God is something that happens in our daily life and in the small things that we're doing. It's more about, and what Memento Mori has helped me to do, and meditation on death has helped me to do, is to focus myself on Jesus in those daily moments and in those ordinary choices that I make every single day. It's also helped me to make good choices, like bigger choices. But I don't think that meditation on death or the Catholic view of death should cause us to kind of denigrate our ordinary lives and the ordinary things that we engage in, because that's exactly where we meet God and where we find union with God.
Thank you for the call. Thanks. I'm sorry that we didn't get to every caller. Sister Teresa Aletheia is our guest. If you want to find out more about her, go to pursuedbytruth.com, pursuedbytruth.com. And if you want the Lenten meditation, Sister, how do people get that?
You can just look up Memento Mori Lenten Devotional, and you'll find it on Amazon and on our PaulineStore.org.
Memento Mori Lenten Devotional. Sister, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the time with you very, very much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it too, Sai.
You can find out all about Sister again at pursuedbytruth.com. Thanks again, Marie, for a great week. Jesus Christ is the light of the nations. And we'll see you next time right here on Catholic Answers Live.